All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a peach of an episode for you today. We've got Jake Wood from Groundswell. Jake is very, very well-spoken guy. He's given very massive, huge keynotes. He's been featured in the New York Times, talked about his journey from being a warrior to then a nonprofit leader and then an entrepreneur. So we're going to get into those several different stages of his life, how that all evolved, and what he makes of it. So Jake, thank you so much for joining us. How are you feeling today?
Hey, I'm feeling great. Thanks for having me, Casey.
Yeah, and you're looking good too, my friend. So it's very good to see you. So can you just start by sharing a little bit about Groundswell, what it is, what you do, and then we can kind of get a little bit more backstory and we'll take it from there.
Sure. So Groundswell is a venture-backed software as a service platform with a goal of democratizing corporate philanthropy. So at its core, what we do, we provide companies with a platform that allows them to roll out tax-advantaged charitable giving accounts to their employees and then give or match funds into them. So I guess probably the best analogy that most of your listeners would understand is it's like a 401k or an HSA for charity.
Fantastic. So giving back is a very big part of, especially the younger generation, I think, the millennials compared to Gen Y, Gen Z, and the boomers, very different in their philosophy. I think a lot of the younger people want to contribute more, make a difference to the planet, and a big part of that is giving. So what made you initially come up with the concept and then a beautiful design? It looks very much like an Apple product when I was playing around with it. I was very impressed with that. But what was the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. We're really proud of what we built. I think that there's been a groundswell of sentiment among younger generations that companies should exist for more than just maximizing shareholder value. So, Milton Friedman, famously said that was the sole purpose of any enterprise was to maximize returns for shareholders, and that's at the root of capitalism. I'm not here to debate the bedrock of capitalism, but I do think it's indisputable that younger folks believe that companies should have some sort of higher purpose alongside profit, and that they don't have to be at odds with one another. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. So, how did I come up with the idea for Groundswell? I have a very atypical background to becoming a technology entrepreneur. I'm sure we're going to get into that. But prior to starting this company, I ran a nonprofit that I'd started back in 2010 called Team Rubicon. And over the course of about a decade, I raised, almost $350 million for philanthropy. So I really got an understanding of how philanthropy works, what works well, what doesn't. And one of the things I saw was that companies think they're really good at giving away money, and they're not. And I found that to be really unfortunate, even as good as we were at Team Rubicon at raising money from companies, because I felt like they were leaving so much opportunity on the table. And that opportunity was, better aligning values with their employees, really serving to attract values aligned and retain values aligned employees, thereby reducing cost, thereby ultimately making that corporate philanthropy more sustainable. So, we really set out with the mission to decentralize that corporate philanthropy, empower employees to give that money away. And the result is 18 months later, we're out in the market with a really compelling product.
Fantastic. And a great product it is as well, because ultimately you're making a bigger difference. So you made a huge difference with Team Rubicon, like you said, raising 350 million. It's a huge number, right? And that then goes and becomes very significant for a lot of people in need. So great job on that. But when we look at the millennial generation, or just the younger generation, we don't necessarily have to tag them with a title, but people, W-2 employees that can directly give away, it is part of even the advanced structures that we create from tax savings, but really important for people to know that there are options out there, and it's up to 30% of your top line W-2 salary that can be donated totally tax-free. People don't quite realize the power of that. Now, I'm not saying everyone has to go and donate 30% of their money, but the way we do it with the higher net worth clients is that if they are W-2s, usually lawyers and doctors are the ones that fall into the category, but they can donate directly out of their salary into what we would set up as a private foundation for them, so they can do their philanthropy that way. how does that differ, or how is it similar to the way you guys do it?
It's funny that you use that that story of how you work with your high net worth clients, because I imagine when you say that you're directing that money into a private foundation, what you're actually meaning is you put it into a donor advised fund. Is that true?
No, we actually set up the 501c3s, the private foundations, tax exempt status.
Really, for each of those clients?
For the clients that need that specific setup, yeah.
Oh, interesting. So one of the things that I saw was that, individuals that have, super high net worth, hundreds of millions of dollars, that's typically what they do. They set up a 501c3 public charity, or
I was a
private
private, not
foundation.
public. So
Yeah, or private foundation.
yeah, it's slightly different when you get into, hey, this is for our family. We don't want it to be in the public eye, but we still want to give. That's why we go private rather than public.
Yeah. Yeah, and both are options, and I saw them both, and they both have tons of complexity and tax requirements and reporting requirements, audits, all of minimum distribution requirements.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, if you have the resources, it's a good way to go. The alternative option for just like marginally high net worth people is you create a donor advised fund, which is effectively a tax advantaged restricted account within a public charity that you can get immediate tax advantages through, but then you retain advisory privileges over those funds and where they go. And historically, those donor advised funds have been inaccessible to the average person. You really actually had to be a high net worth person with, somebody like KC advising you on how you spend your money and design your tax strategy. What Groundswell's done is we've actually created the world's most modern and accessible donor advised fund. So our platform actually provisions discrete individual donor advised funds to each of those employees. And as a result, makes available to them a giving vehicle that historically they haven't had access to, with tons of tax advantages that come with it. They can contribute their own funds and take an immediate tax deduction without having to give the funds away right away. They can contribute appreciated stock assets into that, not have to pay capital gains taxes. They can invest the balance of those funds for tax-free growth for, greater giving in the future. And so, that was the approach we took. We kind of took this philosophy that everybody should be able to give like Bill Gates. There's no reason that they shouldn't in, 2022. And that was the vision that we had.
It's slightly different to the way Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are doing it, because these guys, that's similar to the way we operate, is they will create foundations and trusts, and they will donate from one hand, give to the other hand. And yes, they do a lot of good. I'm not discouraging any of that, but the majority of what they do is still very much under their control. So they don't own it, but they control it. So I really like what you guys are doing because it's very similar to us. It reminds me of the reason I set up my company Together CFO was to take those advanced strategies that most people don't have access to, and then give it to for you, it's give it to everyone who's a W-2 employee. But for us, is to give it to that next level of multi 7 to 9 figure entrepreneur that's paying too much in taxes. So
yeah,
very much aligned with that. So continue on the good work. So let's kind of recap a little bit through your history, because you've got a fantastic backstory going from the nonprofit to then a warrior and now an entrepreneur. But again, it's all back to philanthropy, because what you do ultimately helps give back and make a real difference in charitable good. What kind of took you into that direction? And can you just kind of take us through the high level on those different segments of your life?
Sure. Well, I'll say that, giving back has always been a part of my life. I grew up in Iowa, and was involved in the community early on while I was in high school and all of that stuff, involved in, student hunger drives and things of that nature. I ended up going to college at the University of Wisconsin. I was a football player. I didn't really think about much other than trying to get to the NFL. Turns out I wasn't a very good football player, and ended up in the Marine Corps. All so right. I graduated from Wisconsin in 2005, height of the war, and ended up enlisting in the Marine Corps. I served 4 years there. So, I would say that, my commitment to service really accelerated from that little bug I had while I was in high school to this notion of serving my country. And I served overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan, first in an infantry unit, later in a scout sniper unit. And honestly, when I got out of the Marine Corps in 2009, I kind of thought my era of service was coming to a close. My plan was to go back to graduate school, get my MBA, probably go be an investment banker, and wasn't thinking twice about that. I ended up accidentally starting a nonprofit in 2010, just 60 days after getting out of the Marine Corps. Again, I was waiting for my grad school applications to come back. An earthquake hit Haiti. I felt compelled to go. I organized a team to get down there. We got to Haiti about 4 days after the earthquake and began running medical triage clinics all across the city. And this was the worst humanitarian catastrophe of the last 100 years. It was complete and utter chaos, and it just snowballed. And if you fast forward from that moment in January 2010 after the earthquake to today, Team Rubicon's got over 150,000 volunteers. It's raised that $350 million for its work that I mentioned. They've responded to over 1,000 humanitarian catastrophes and disasters over the decade, and really became one of the, I would say, premier nonprofits in America. And it was just an incredible opportunity to be an entrepreneur, but to give back. And that's really what led me to Groundswell. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur again. I'd gotten the bug, but I still wanted whatever I did next to be meaningful. And Groundswell's really given me that opportunity by, again, bringing these donor advised funds and making them accessible to everyone.
No, that makes a huge difference. And can you just explain what a donor advised fund is for the people who don't understand what that is? Give them some more context.
Yeah, so a donor advised fund is basically a public charity will give donors the opportunity to donate funds to that public charity. And then the public charity basically serves as a custodian for those funds on behalf of that donor. They technically control it. But what the donor retains is advisory privileges over those funds. And they can advise effectively two things. One, they can advise how those funds are invested while the charity maintains them. But then they can advise where the charity ultimately grants those funds to recipient nonprofit organizations. And so there's a lot of reasons why individuals use donor advised funds. One, they're just much easier to set up than an actual personal foundation.
Oh yeah, we know the hard work that goes into creating a private foundation, the time, and then on the IRS side, none of these things move quickly. It takes up to a year now because of COVID being used as an excuse. So definitely the higher net worth people would look into that, but for the vast majority of people, I would definitely not. I would recommend that they do not do a private foundation themselves. So a donor advised fund is probably the next best thing.
Yeah, absolutely, because they get all the tax advantages without any of the headache. And that's probably oversimplifying it, but it's not too far from the truth. And often people will use these because they might have a big windfall financial event. That could be that their company goes public. They have a lot of options that are suddenly converting, and they want to minimize their tax bill in a given year. So they may transfer a significant amount of money into a donor advised fund, take that full deduction in the current year, but then they can advise and distribute those funds in subsequent years. And they could be the next year, could be over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And that's one of the big advantages. And I of course, mentioned previously that, the ability to donate appreciated assets and take the full market value of those assets as a write-off while not having to pay any capital gains taxes on it is a huge advantage. And nor does the nonprofit, or in this case, the public foundation that is serving as the donor advised fund, they don't have to pay the capital gains tax either. So it's a win-win across the board.
So we can break that down a little bit more, because when I tell potential clients that, hey, we can totally eliminate capital gains tax, the number one thing is, how is this even legal? How is it possible? And this is one way that it works really well for charities. Another way is foundations. Another way is trusts. So there's many different ways to do this. It's just, how good is your advisory team? How good are the people around you? Because ultimately the people around you will either know this or they won't. But if they don't know it, they're making you think that it doesn't even exist. And I think that's a lot of the problem, is that, especially with the things that we do, and kind of you're breaking ground in a whole new avenue of a tool for giving, right? and a tax advantaged way is that you're only as good as the team around you. So if someone hadn't heard of Groundswell or didn't know that trusts can help you save on taxes as well and control those assets, they wouldn't know any better. And we've often had conversations with people after they've sold a company or, like you said, exercised some shares or had a big windfall. And they're like, I wish I'd met you a year sooner.
Yeah.
All you had to do was research it. Like, don't just take the word of your lawyer, CPA, friend. You got to do the work yourself. And if you're looking to give in a charitable way and you are a W-2, then Groundswell is a perfect way to do that, seamlessly designed. And let's talk a little bit about that, because there's one thing creating a company and being an entrepreneur. And then when we start stacking technology on top of that and making technology kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting so it's seamless, and you guys done a great job of that. What we're because it's a completely different skill set to being a standard entrepreneur, because now we're talking tech, and this is multiple languages all within the tech world and integrations. How did you go about building that, designing that, taking it from beginning to end, and then getting it to work?
Yeah, I've joked with our venture capital investors that everything I needed to learn about being a software entrepreneur, I learned as a sniper. And, I think I usually get a chuckle from people with that. But I really do believe that the foundation of entrepreneurship that I gained was earned in the Marine Corps. When you think about the work that I did in places like Afghanistan, I worked in a 6-man scout sniper team, running operations and missions in some of the most complex and uncertain environments on the planet. And when you think about what entrepreneurship is, it's an impossible mission with, typically what starts as a small team with daunting circumstances, high stakes, tons of uncertainty and volatility. And there's only, one option, and that's to win. And so just being able to navigate risk, keep calm under pressure, exercise good judgment consistently in the absence of perfect information. Those were the types of environments that I thrived in. And certainly that's been the case first as an entrepreneur in the nonprofit space. And again, I, cutting my teeth as a nonprofit entrepreneur, one of the things I learned is it's a lot easier to be a for-profit entrepreneur than a nonprofit entrepreneur. Yeah. And I went out, I raised $15 million in venture capital before we even had a product. The advantages that's afforded me over the last 18 months in how we can thoughtfully build a team without having to scrape by for the first, 5 years, like we did at Team Rubicon. I had an investor joke with me once. They said, Jake, you were training with ankle weights on while you were running Team Rubicon. If you've ever, heard that analogy or used ankle weights in physical training, like you take them off and suddenly you feel like you're the fastest person in the world. And that's exactly what it felt like moving over to this.
Fantastic. So I work with a lot of ex-military people in my corporate job before I started my own business over at FlowServe, ex-Navy people, ex-Marines, but mainly ex-nuclear people, because that's the subsection that I was running. And the first thing I noticed about the majority of these people was their discipline. They were so well drilled in, hey, this is how we do it. This is why we do it. Boom, boom, boom. And there was such a big disparity between a project manager that I was working with who was ex-military and a non-ex-military person. And it was like, holy smokes, there's something different about these guys, the way they're wired, framed, and the way they think. So just you sharing that kind of brings back that memory of the old corporate America, but specifically the military people, or the ex-military people that I worked with along the way, just being wired a little bit differently. And exactly the way you described it, you've learned on the hardest battlegrounds in real life, risking your life and limbs for the country. And then there's only one option to win for us all. No one's in this game to lose. So you just got to take one step forward every single day, whether that's a big step or a small step. As long as you're going in the right direction and you don't give up, you'll eventually get there.
Absolutely.
And I love that. So
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That fortitude, that willingness to persevere, like perseverance is one of the most important traits that you can have in the Marine Corps, and absolutely one of the most important traits you can have as an entrepreneur.
I was at dinner last night and we were talking about age. I was with a few guys that are a little older than me. And they were talking about achievements and one of the guys had just turned 50, and he's like, I don't feel as if I've achieved much in my first 50 years. And I'm like, it doesn't matter what age you are, because you can look at Colonel Sanders as an example with KFC, and there's many other people that everyone around the table listed to then share that you can still become whatever you deem a success is, regardless of an age barrier. And the key unifying factor around the table was not to give up. If you give up too soon, if you knock on the first 45 doors and they say no, but the 46th one says yes, if you don't do those first 45, you're never going to get to that first yes. So with every no, it just gets you closer to that next yes. So definitely perseverance, but I think mindset, right? And it's definitely linked, that discipline, that mindset of winning and achieving what you need to, but doing it in such a disciplined way. I think that was the one thing that really struck me about the military people, or the ex-military people, was that they were so disciplined. They had their routines. They knew exactly what was where, and they were just on top of their shit from a corporate perspective. And I really loved that.
Yeah, I think, I've had the pleasure of getting to know some nuclear officers, and pilots are much the same way coming out of the military. I didn't work closely with either while I was in, but I've worked a lot with them as I've gotten out. And when you're talking about, high stakes, there are a few things as high stakes as maintaining the nuclear reactor on a submarine 5,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. And I think one of the things, though, that I draw a distinction on is those nuke officers, or call it military veterans writ large, they are very good at doing the simple things really well. And, if you can boil those simple things down into a checklist of, hey, here's exactly how we run through this process. Yes, they're going to run through that process that way every single time. But I think often people put military veterans into a box that's all they're capable of. Yes, they have discipline, but only in doing things that they're told how to do. But there's this whole other side of the military, which is more entrepreneurial, which does allow for this empowered creativity for solving complex problems. When you think about tactics, which is what I just described, versus techniques is the checklist. Yeah, they're good at the techniques, but the tactics is the application of everything that they know within a novel circumstance. Right. So it's the application of those tactics on the battlefield, that judgment in the face of uncertainty, that I don't think they're often as credited for, but that's really where you get the entrepreneurs from.
Yeah, it's kind of strategy, right? So if you did tactics and what was the second one there? Techniques. I would look at, the way I frame it is strategy and tactics. One is the strategy of, hey, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And then the second is the tactics that we're going to use to execute it, right? So, yeah, I'm not so aware of that side of the military. Can you give us a couple of examples of how you were able to kind of accelerate and kind of put your own flavor on things whilst serving?
Yeah, I mean, I think the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan were ever evolving, and it ranged from troops finding novel ways to counter the roadside bomb threat, and that might be that was both technological. So the U.S. military was constantly fielding new technology on the battlefield to counter the latest IED, improvised explosive device tactics, and that ranged from cell phone signal jammers to more like blunt instrument, like rollers in front of vehicles that would detonate bombs out in front of vehicles instead of underneath, to then how troops would implement those things on the battlefield. Conversely, like when I went to Afghanistan as a sniper, the historical sniper team is a two-person team, 2 Marines, a shooter and a spotter. But by the time I got to Afghanistan in 2009, we'd already cycled from a 2-person team to a 4-person team. And then we were the first battalion to field 6-person sniper teams on a battlefield. And now you have to understand that the way that the tactics book had been written was for a 2-person team. And now you had to figure out, okay, how do you operate in this threat environment with 6 people? It's fundamentally different. So we wrote that playbook as we were out there for 7 months, and innovated on ways that you could employ 6 people in a mission without getting detected, concentrating fires, all of that, to the point where when we got back from Afghanistan, I got pulled along with 3 of our other snipers to go to sniper school and teach them the tactics that we had created on the fly, because that had become the new normal.
Fantastic. So we can relate that into the business world as well, because that's a very specific thing. But that same scenario happens every single day in business, where you go into it maybe with a skill set of Marines or finance or accountant or whatever your background is. And then you quickly realize when you're live in play in the real world, competing with other businesses, that it's very different and it's changing every single day. So to get over that change and combat that change, you're reacting in live time, right? If something like COVID happens and your business goes completely online versus in person, and now everyone's panicked and everyone's going crazy, but you just figure it out as you go along. I think the key to going through those types of things is having good documentation, so systems, processes, SOPs, flowcharts, whatever your business uses, so that you can make the new version of whatever that is. So in this example, it was a 2-person to a 4-person to a 6-person. It may not be 6 people all around the world at any given time. So now effectively you can write 2 new handbooks, one for a 2-person team, one for a 6-person team, keep that archived, keep it updated. And that's the modern way to use that in business warfare rather than actual physical warfare, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to build upon that, I think one of the dangers that people have in those moments of chaos, like a COVID-19, right, where they have a playbook, they have the way that it's always been done, is I think weak cultures, weak leaders, they cling to those things. Those things are valuable, right? They're the foundation of your business, the foundation of your operations. But if you cling to them and you don't realize or appreciate that they were written for a different world, a different normal, and they may not be applicable in this new normal that you're encountering. And if you're unwilling to either evolve them or just shred them and start over, that could have really dire consequences for your team. And so, really having that understanding and that courage to say, okay, these rules, these processes, these systems were built for yesterday. Now, how do we face the threat of today with the understanding of what we used to do? I think that's really what separates great organizations from organizations that flounder in those moments.
I couldn't agree more. So just to kind of summarize and recap, that is to take the knowledge that we already have, but not have it totally be the new Bible and the only way we can do things. So use it for its pros, but then also don't forget to innovate and evolve if the situation or circumstance permits, right? It's not that it's set in stone and we can't ever change it. We should always be, the way I run my business is, we should always be trying to improve everything. And if we can, we need to speak up, but we need to be in a safe environment in order to speak up, right? I think another part of that is the culture in the business allowing the people or the leaders to speak, or not even the leaders. The leader could be the person opening the door versus the CEO. Everyone's a leader in their own right. So does the organization allow for everyone to contribute and allow the company to get better as a whole? Because if it doesn't, you've got a big culture problem.
Yeah, and I love the word that you used. Do your people feel safe enough to speak up, to generate their ideas, to make recommendations? I think all too often when leaders today talk about a culture of safety, people think that they're talking about a culture of entitlement or coddling people. And I just think that that's not the case, right? I reflect back on my time in the military, and I always say that the courage that you'd see on the battlefield came from this sense of safety. And of course, that wasn't physical safety. Often that courage was in moments of great physical danger. But the safety was psychological. That safety was emotional, because they knew that if they went down on that battlefield, there'd be a dozen Marines lined up to go and get them. So they felt psychologically and emotionally safe in those moments of danger. And I think if a leader can replicate that in a business environment where, people are not, kicked to the curb for a mistake, where people are not chastised for new ideas, but instead they know that they can safely generate those things. Like, that's where you get innovation. That's where you get the right type of risk takers in your organization that move it forward.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And then what are some of the things that you've done in your organization to help curate that culture and empower people to kind of take it to the next level?
Yeah, I always say that, if you're working backwards from courage, you'll find safety, but at the root of all of that is this culture of love, compassion, empathy. And I'm a big believer in that. I think you have to truly care about the people that you're leading. You have to demonstrate to them that they are more to you than just a means to whatever corporate end you're pursuing. And that means understanding who they are, how they got to be where they are today on your team, pursuing your mission with you, more importantly, where they want to go in their life, and then convincing them that, hey, I'm going to be a part of that journey for you. And as your leader, your manager, your boss, I'm going to do everything in my power to make you the best professional version of yourself, to set you up to accomplish that. When you can do that, and there's a lot of other stuff that goes into it, but at the root of it, if you can do that, frankly, you're 80% of the way there. That's an emotionally exhausting form of leadership. You have a lot of people who say, you know what, like, I signed up to be the boss, not to be somebody's therapist. And I get it. And it is emotionally taxing. But for me, at least, it is what unlocks the most in people.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it makes me just think of this one phrase that stays with me all the time. It's be more interested than interesting. And it's be more interested in people than you feel that they need to be interested in you.
Yeah,
and
that's powerful.
ultimately it's the same thing that you're saying right there, is create that environment where people feel loved and cared for. Because I'm an accountant, so I can talk in accountant speak, and the way I phrase it is that people are the biggest asset of any business, yet they don't appear on any financial statement anywhere. And it's without those good people around you, nothing gets done. Like, as an example, I've got a team around me, and without them, I'm just sat here doing nothing. It's like, really, and we look out for each other, and it's like, hey, this is a hole here, this is a hole here. And we had to work on what we spoke about earlier, which was people being able to speak freely and feel safe, which is why I brought it up, because this is a challenge within my business. It was not everybody was speaking directly to me because they thought, oh, I might get fired or this or that. And I was like, we need to stop this. And I maybe said this to the team 50 or so times, but it wasn't sinking in. So it was something in my delivery that I had to change. And then when the message kept coming back that other people are saying this, and it's like, well, why can't they just say that to me directly? Like, that's a problem that I need to fix. So eventually they got to a safety threshold, and it's different for everybody, but they got to that threshold where slowly but surely they've started now saying things more directly, even though it was nothing really to do with me. Because when we got to the bottom of it, it was to do with their own shyness and their own personality, but more the fact that they're breaking through those barriers of their own and growing as people, right? Because ultimately that's where the love and affection comes from. They feel loved and safe, so they'll start contributing more and growing as a person, which shows up in the business form of, oh, this person's actually contributing more ideas to the meeting. So it's the knock-on consequence of feeling safe and feeling loved that then brings up all this improved productivity from a business standpoint.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So let's move forward into the future. So where do you see the future for Groundswell or Giving? Because we didn't really touch on it, but a lot of these big corporate companies have social responsibility. And we had the same thing at Flowserve when I was there. We had multi-million-dollar budget that we had for being socially responsible, whatever that means. And we wasted a lot of money. So everything that you said really resonated with me and brought back those corporate days of, we've got a huge department with a massive budget, and nobody really knows what they're doing other than one page in the corporate financial statement every year that we're looking at, and we're like, what is this really for? So
yeah,
the fact that you brought that up really touched home, because Flowserve's not the only Fortune 500 company that's like that. They all have a percentage of what they give. Are you going into those companies and educating their department so they can then let their employees know that this is available and we can integrate it into ADP or like whatever payroll software they use? Or how is it How can the average employee listening get onto Groundswell and get their company on board?
Yeah, you said a couple things there that really resonated with me. The first one is, a lot of these CSR departments, corporate social responsibility departments, have massive budgets, and I think a lot of people are wondering what are we doing with that? And the truth of the matter is, often, those CSR efforts are really just the pet projects of CEOs. The CEO says, "Here's what I think is most important, and we're going to do this." Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, but the truth of the matter is, if you've got 1,000 employees and you have only one person making a decision about what the most important problem is to try to solve or what the best solution is to fund, that's not representative of what those 1,000 people care about. And so our argument is maximize the impact of your CSR by celebrating the diverse perspectives of your people. You and I, listen, if we worked at the same company, what you care about socially, the issues that matter most to you are going to be wildly different than what matters to me.
Absolutely.
So why are we having one person in these companies make that decision? Just doesn't make sense. And so, our approach is we're not, what's called a product-led growth company. We're not coming in through, rank and file employees. We're selling software to, enterprise buyers. And that means we're going primarily to human resource departments, and executives within those HR teams to sell this as a corporate benefit. So what can listeners do if they're an employee at a company and they want to take the Groundswell way? Send a note to their head of HR and say, "Hey, how can we decentralize or democratize our corporate philanthropy, and give me a piece of it, right? Give me a piece of where we send this, and Groundswell is the way to do that."
Yeah, because there's a lot of advantage. And just to recap to the people listening, if you are an employee of a company and you want to take some of those tax advantages, because you get a big benefit as well. You get to potentially control where that money goes, how it's invested, but you also get a tax deduction in the given year that you do that. So it's not just all about giving. There is some personal gain in there as well. So everybody wins. It's a win-win all round. And ultimately, that money can go to good. I do a lot of philanthropy myself. I have my own foundation. We've recently done a lot for sex-trafficked children in LA specifically over the age of 18, because the system stops caring for them at age 18 and puts them back onto the streets, and they tend to go back into what they know best. So we're trying to support that and trying to keep that abreast. It's ridiculous, the numbers of people that actually fall into these categories that we just don't realize. So we've been working with Donna Pearson and the Rusnet Group on that. So that's very close and dear to my heart at this moment. But any type of giving, no matter how big or small it is, it all makes a difference. So with that as the central focus, whether it's tax advantages, whether it's just donor advised funds, so you literally can control where that money is spent. But it doesn't even have to be that. It could be as simple as going to your local charity or religious place and helping out. It doesn't even have to be financial. It's just trying to make the world a better place. So with that being said, Jake, what are the best ways for people to contact you or reach out to the company and kind of get involved?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty easy to find personally. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and Twitter, so people can find me, Jake Wood, just Jake Wood at Jake Wood TR on Twitter, / Jake Wood USA on LinkedIn. The website for Groundswell is www.groundswell.io. You can get in touch with us there, reach out for a demo. You can also follow Groundswell across all the social channels. Again, pretty easy to find. Would love to have you start a dialogue and see where it leads.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. And for everyone listening, we're going to put the links right down below here for Jake and Groundswell as well. So it makes life easy for you. Jake, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.